Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
Do you find public speaking to be mentally and physically exhausting? I know I do. After I speak, I'm happy to go to my hotel room and relax for a while. And I speak about public speaking. How draining is it for those speakers, and maybe you're one of them, who speak about topics and experiences that carry a great deal of emotional weight? How do you keep your emotions in check? Well, Tricia Roos is here with us today to help answer these and other questions. But before we get into it, let me tell you a little bit about Tricia. She's built a winning career in sports and high school admissions, but found her greatest victory in a loss. Author of When Wishes Change, she now makes a living by speaking about her daughter who died shortly after birth. Listen in as she shares how she learned to make her presentations powerful and genuine, while ensuring that she doesn't break down in tears due to the emotion attached to her story. Here's my conversation with Tricia Roos. Hi, Tricia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tricia, you share a very emotional story, and anybody who's ever tried to do that understands how difficult it can be. What's your story and your motivation to share it with others?
You know, part of me always has loved public speaking and speaking in front of crowds. I did that as a volleyball coach for the last 20 years. And in my profession, I did a lot of public speaking as well. But actually what I speak about to audiences is more a personal story and testimony. And in 2014, I was pregnant with my second child. It's kind of one of those things that, my husband and I had always thought we'd have two children, and we had our boy. We were pregnant with a girl, and life was great. And right at the end of the first trimester, we found out that our child had a diagnosis called trisomy 18, and that the chances of her survival were basically slim to none. We were advised to have an abortion, and we decided that was not something that we were comfortable doing. And so we continued on with this pregnancy, and I was going into volleyball season at the time, which is really fun, lighthearted, optimistic time for athletes. And I was having to face this really dark news of my pregnancy and tell them about it. And what ended up happening from there was my little Catholic school volleyball team ended up dedicating their season to my daughter, and we won a state championship. And that's hard to do. And it was actually our third in a row, which is even harder to do and to pull off. But they were completely selfless and dedicated in her name of doing this together. And then about a month and a half later, I gave birth to her at a local hospital. It's a really big hospital in Dallas, and they'd never had a live trisomy 18 birth at the hospital. No doctor would have thought she could have made it full term and been born alive, because she also had a 2-chamber heart, but she was. So then about a month after this miraculous state championship, I'm giving birth to a daughter that was never supposed to live. And I was warned that she would likely only live minutes, and she ended up living 6 days. And so our story was actually made into a documentary by the local Catholic kind of newspaper video affiliate. And I just felt really called to write a book about that several years later. And after I finished writing the book, I felt really called that this was a powerful story that deserved to be spoken to large groups. The book title is called When Wishes Change. And I made the messaging and the story more about how do we respond when our wishes, like my wish for a healthy baby girl and an easy pregnancy and to have my second child, changes, and everything around you changes because of it. How do you make the best out of that opportunity or that situation? without totally just being devastated and living and paralyzed by the pain. I kind of had that calling in the writing the book over the pandemic. And I knew that that was a message that could really be relatable to a lot of people. That idea of like when wishes change. We all had a lot of life changes over the last 2 years. I never planned on this, but it ended up happening because of something personal that happened to me. And I think because of my background in coaching and speaking in the job that I had, it just naturally came together and provided me a platform to speak to larger audiences.
It's an incredible story. Having gone through this, what advice do you have for others when they're delivering stories with such heavy emotional weight?
So that was something that struck me when I started speaking that I didn't know would happen until it did. So I could get in front of any audience and talk about, my profession was admissions in a private school. So I could tell you about the admissions process and the steps and great stories about students that we had at our Catholic school and the colleges that they went to. I could also get in front of a team and motivate them and inspire them to win games and to perform at the highest level in athletics. But what I didn't realize was how hard it would be to speak of something so personal and so emotional. The hardest thing for me was when I'm delivering my keynote and my speech is I really almost have to remove myself, like my physical self, out of my body for a minute to talk about my story, because I know the bigger picture is that if I can compose myself and deliver a great speech to an audience, it can have a lasting impact on how they see the world and how they can allow their wishes to change. But if I live in that emotion and I allow myself to completely like relive some of what I went through, it's very difficult for me when I'm really deep in it to not cry or feel those emotions and really just kind of destroy the message. So I think about how, for example, I've spoken at different funerals, like my grandma's or my grandpa's. And I remember in those moments taking deep breaths and saying, I just have to get through this and almost have an out of body experience and talk about my love and respect towards my grandma and what she did for me without living too deep in the emotion of what I am feeling, or else it defeats the purpose of why I'm doing it. So I've gotten so much better at that over time. And I can't say I'm perfect. I mean, there's definitely been moments where I maybe need a minute, or I could tear up just a little bit talking about a specific story that really gets me. But I try to keep the bigger picture in mind, that if I can compose myself and deliver a really good message to the audience, that they can live with that forever and hopefully motivate them.
Do you believe when the emotion does get the best of you, that adds some trust and vulnerability?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I say I kind of take myself away from my body, but in a way, I also think that when you speak with passion and genuineness, and you are talking about something that's really difficult, there will be emotion, especially like certain stories that I talk about. Like I can't help but have some emotional heartstrings pulling at me, because I mean, I had a daughter that died in my arms. That's not easy to talk about, whether it's 5 years later, 10 years later, 30 years later. I mean, that still will be a part of who I am and a part of my story forever. But I think that I'm able now, there's been some time to take a deep breath and refocus my attention on the message and what I'm really trying to say. And I have to kind of pull myself back a bit from this story to make sure that I can still deliver the message in one piece. Probably about 2 years after my daughter died, I was asked to speak to a group at a retreat. I thought it had been enough time. I didn't really properly prepare. I just went to speak. And I remember just at some point I was extremely triggered and broke down crying. And I really couldn't even finish the message and the address that I wanted to. And it did make it really real. Like there was also tears around me for what I went through. but I let myself go completely. And I think that, there's a line that you have to put in the sand there where you let yourself be genuine and real and sincere and vulnerable. But you also can't do that every time you speak in front of an audience, especially if you're getting paid to do it. The other thing along with that, I think, was that as I became a speaker and started getting paid speaking engagement, I did appreciate the preparation it takes for delivering a good message. So I knew that if I rehearsed certain things or went through the key points in my head in advance, I was much less likely to have that slip up or that breakdown than if I wouldn't have prepared. And so that's a big part of it too, I think, is that if you're more prepared, you're able to be in the moment in those situations and feel the emotions and be real and vulnerable, but also pull yourself back and continue on.
It's not an easy thing to do. And I like how you say that there's that line you have to be aware of, and if you're crossing it or not. I've never had to deal with anything like that in speaking, and I give you a lot of credit. Tricia, speaking on any subject can leave a speaker physically and emotionally drained. How does speaking about your story affect you after speaking to an audience?
This was also something that I learned probably the hard way, and I started having to give myself a little bit of grace. So in October, for example, I traveled to Charleston, South Carolina, and I spoke at a large Catholic high school with about 800 students. Because of COVID and the restrictions for how many could fit in the auditorium, I had to speak one time to freshmen and sophomores, and then another time to juniors and seniors. And then they had also asked me to have a parent meeting where I spoke that evening. And so I spoke for 45 minutes, 3 times in one day. And after each speaking engagement, the morning one, the afternoon, and the evening, I had parents, I had kids, in line to talk to me and be like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, and ask me questions. And it was really like rewarding to be like, oh, they really want to know more. And even the long line of kids that were like, they've never lost a child, but they could understand the pain of having a wish change or having expectations shifted from whatever it is that they're going on in their lives. And I remember flying home and almost being on like such a high, like that was amazing. That was so fun. I really feel like I changed lives. Well, within 24 hours of being home and going back to normal life, I completely crashed. I was emotional. I was sad. I felt depressed. And it was really confusing because I was like, I had this huge speaking engagement and this gig that I was so excited about. Why am I a complete mess? And I think that the weight of the topic and really just like reliving some of those stories and some of the things that I do write about in my book and I speak about, it just caught up with me. And I didn't know that would happen, expect that to happen. And at first I was just really mad at myself for kind of thinking and not wanting to function that day. And I'm a go-getter. I'm super busy. I have 2 kids and a husband. My days are really, really packed, jammed, busyness. And I didn't want to do a single thing for like 2 or 3 days after I returned. And also I realized that if I pack on too many speaking engagements or podcasts or whatever in a short period of time, I don't get that recovery that I need emotionally, physically, spiritually. So I've been a little bit more intentional on giving myself grace and knowing that happens most of the time after I speak. And so it's like when you expect something to happen, it's not as bad as if it's unexpected and unplanned for. But that was definitely something I learned, I guess, the hard way when that happened the first time, because it was just really defeating and confusing as to why I was having those emotions.
It's a tough thing. If you've done it, you'd know how difficult it is with something that's not as emotional as what you share. I have a client who's 30. He's an athlete. He's in great shape, but he speaks about a very emotional topic as well. The first time he ever had 2 gigs on the same day, he said to me, oh, that won't be a problem. I said, let me know what it's like when you're done.
Yeah.
And he said, I can't believe how exhausted I am, and both physically and emotionally. So it's not easy. And if people haven't done it, it's tough to realize how taxing it can be.
I'm sure for him too, when you speak about emotional topics, one thing that you have to know as a speaker is that it can draw out emotion from your audience. That can be a little surprising as well. So with each group that I spoke to, there were a lot of tears in the audience. I saw one girl just totally break down, crying on her friend's shoulder. I saw a boy in the back corner, crying and had to leave. I'm speaking about something already emotionally exhausting for me. And I'm watching like these kids dropping like flies, because they were finding that common ground. And I spoke at 2 different colleges where I saw similar things going around me. And that is its own toll that it takes, because I felt after that, I needed to find a counselor immediately in the school and be like, the girl in the second row that had brown hair, please someone go find her and make sure she's okay. Because I don't know what it was that I said that triggered her or what she's going through in her life. But I really hope somebody can speak with her, because I felt like I must have brought something out and spoken about something that was very sensitive to her. So I think that sometimes you have to understand that not only could your emotions get in the way of you delivering a message, but it can also be distracting to see others in the audience emotionally responding to your message, and how you have to be able to almost unsee that and continue on. Because so much of me wanted to just stop and be like, could someone please go help her? Like, I don't know what's happening, but I need someone to go help this girl. And you can't do that in the middle of a speech.
And like I said, I can't even imagine. I speak about public speaking. I mean, we're on different ends of the spectrum. I give you and the client I was speaking about, and people who speak about such emotionally driven topics, a lot of credit that you can even do it, and then deal with the reaction that some people may have to it. So what are some of the tips you can share with my listeners that'll help them stay on track when they're sharing emotional stories?
I hate to say the word rehearse, because I think sometimes if I over prepare, it seems very scripted and it doesn't feel and sound as genuine if I just kind of let myself go, like I have maybe some bullet points that I know I'm going to stick around. Because actually the kind of like the liaison that hired me for the speaking engagement, afterwards, she was at all 3 speeches at that particular school. She was like, you said completely different things and shared different stories at each one of your speeches. She thought that was like really interesting. She expected that I would say the same thing once and then again and then again. And so I think there's an art to rehearsing and knowing how you're going to structure a plan, but having some freedom to go a little bit not off topic, but to have different stories shared based on the circumstance or the audience or whatever. Because I definitely shared different stories with an adult audience than I did a student audience. The other thing along with that, I think, is for me, I pray and I need some alone time before I speak to an audience. Again, because it's a very emotional topic, to just focus my energy into giving it my all and staying composed. So in coaching, we talk a lot about visualization. So we would tell our athletes like to visualize yourself if you play a game tomorrow at the worst moment, like how you're going to get yourself out of a really tough situation if we're losing and all these things are going wrong, and how you continue on if you're doing well. And so I think that I use those visualization techniques to be like, okay, what if I start telling this story and I get really emotional? How am I going to find myself back on track? What is it that I could maybe think about and redirect my thoughts so that I can refocus and finish up and not completely lose it? And so I think that's actually something that I've used on myself after using it on athletes for 20 years and never really understanding the benefit until I tried it myself.
That helps a lot, thinking about what do I do when this happens, as opposed to, oh God, I hope this never happens to me.
Yeah, different mindset.
Exactly. Preparation, as it comes down to.
Yep.
Where can people listen to your presentation? Is there anywhere they can go and listen if they are interested?
Absolutely. So my website is whenwisheschange.com. And under the speaking tab, I've actually listed speaking engagements. Not all were recorded, but some were, and then podcasts where I speak. And There's definitely some podcasts that I've been on that I'm really passionate about, like grieving mothers and overcoming situations and obstacles, like what I had been through. And I think that even on a podcast, you don't have a huge audience in front of you, but you are telling your story and sharing stories that are really emotional. Even that, I think, would be good to listen to if that's something that you're speaking about.
Can they audio book through your website too, or Amazon?
Just on Amazon and Kindle. I don't have an audiobook yet, but I do have my book on Amazon. And again, it's called When Wishes Change. And, although it's a sad story, I mean, my daughter did pass away. I think there's a lot of really good inspirational nuggets in there about perseverance and adversity and finding hope in something that seemed hopeless. For me, I love reading books. I love podcasts. Like there's different ways that I find fulfillment to continue on and to stay motivated. And that was my goal in writing the book, was something that could be read by anyone, despite whether you've gone through the exact or a similar situation, and still relating to it in your own way.
Well, I'm sure people will listen to your presentation and hopefully buy your book. Tricia, thanks so much for joining us today, and I wish you the best as you continue to share your very emotional, very powerful story.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.